time I spoke to Sarah Jane on the phone was unfortunately the last time that I'd spoke to any of my children.
Abusing your wife is already terrible, but taking advantage of your stepdaughter in a one-sided relationship is beyond evil. Over 2 decades ago, Lee Ford became known as one of the worst stepdads ever. After mistreating his stepfamily for years, he tragically ended the lives of his wife and her 4 children in the most gruesome way. The details of this case are truly heartbreaking, and we're diving into it because there's a real possibility that this man could be released in the coming years. A lot of people are understandably against it, and once you hear the full story, you'll see why. Stick around until the end, and you'll have a much clearer idea of why his release is such a huge concern for many. Let's kick things off with Leslie, the central figure in this story. On April 3rd, 1964, in the charming riverside town of Fordingbridge, Hampshire, England, Leslie Wyatt gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Leslie Margaret Wyatt. Growing up in Telford, Shropshire, Leslie was surrounded by her loving brother and sister. She grew up to be a spirited and kind person, always ready to help others and greet everyone with a warm smile. At 18, she met Michael Tranter, a guy who seemed like he could be the love of her life. Michael was working one day when he spotted Leslie on the bus. Leslie was working at a nursing home in Wellington at the time, and the connection was instant. Michael thought Leslie was amazing and felt like he'd hit the jackpot. They got along so well that he couldn't wait to walk her home and get to know her better. Their relationship took off quickly. They moved in together, got married, and started a family right away. Michael was overjoyed about becoming a dad, saying it was a dream come true. Leslie, who loved kids, was equally excited. Their first child, Sarah Jane, was born on January 10, 1983. Shortly after, Leslie was pregnant again, leading to the arrival of Anne Marie about a year and a half later. Their family grew with the addition of Stephen and then Craig Jonathan. It seemed like they were a happy family, with Leslie and Michael clearly showing their love for each other through their growing family. But as often happens, things took a turn. The pressure of raising 4 kids so quickly started to weigh heavily on their marriage. Just a year after Craig was born, Michael moved out, and their marriage ended in divorce. Now, Leslie didn't spend much time dwelling on her divorce. She quickly moved on and married a new man named Lee Ford in early 1990. Lee was a laborer from Telford, and after they got married, Leslie and Lee had 2 children together. Unfortunately, the exact years of their births aren't widely documented. As for Leslie and Michael's friends and family, they were all skeptical about Lee Ford. He just gave off a vibe that made those who knew Leslie uneasy. On top of that, Leslie and Lee didn't seem like a perfect match. Leslie was slim and attractive, while Lee had a rough, scruffy look and came across as pretty tough. But what really raised red flags about their relationship was Lee's open dislike for Leslie's ex-partner, Michael. Lee made it clear from the get-go that he didn't want Michael around. He went out of his way to push Michael out of their lives, making excuses to keep him away whenever Michael tried to visit the kids. Lee's controlling nature and extreme jealousy were obvious right from the start, which are often signs of abusive behavior.
We know that extreme jealousy is a risk factor in domestic abuse perpetrators, and therefore they like to think that their wife has never had a previous partner. And in this case, he had 4 reminders, 4 children daily reminding them, and Michael was a good father.
But the warning signs didn't stop there. Just a few months into their marriage, Lee revealed his true colors. He started hitting Leslie and acting aggressively towards her. Leslie soon found herself reaching out for help, telling friends and family that Lee was abusing her. By 1995, Leslie had reached her breaking point. She packed up her children and moved to Cornwall, desperate to escape Lee and start a new life. Her move was a clear sign of her fear and determination to protect her family. However, Lee wasn't ready to let go. He tracked Leslie down by posing as a solicitor and contacting her family, showing just how far he was willing to go to keep control over her. Despite the alarming signs, Leslie decided to give Lee Ford another chance, hoping for a fresh start. They relocated to Carnkey, a small village in Cornwall, with Leslie's 6 children, including the 4 from her previous marriage. But Ford's promises of change turned out to be empty. His abusive behavior only got worse. He became even more controlling, dictating what Leslie could wear and trying to dominate every aspect of her life. Now, let's not rush to blame Leslie for not leaving Lee Ford sooner. Being stuck in an abusive relationship for a long time can seriously damage your self-esteem, making it incredibly hard to break free. A psychologist who looked into this case even said that Lee Ford's abusive behavior stemmed from Leslie's deep love for her children. As we've mentioned earlier, Ford had a big problem with Leslie's ex, Michael, and with Leslie's 4 kids, who constantly reminded him of Michael. Ford felt constantly sidelined because Leslie always put her children first. This frustration caused him to pull away from the family and spend more time drinking at the pub. His anger grew as he felt increasingly pushed aside. But Ford knew exactly what he was getting into. He married a divorced woman with kids, yet his immature and controlling behavior was totally out of line. Reports say that instead of joining in family activities, he would isolate himself in the garage to watch TV. The kids wanted to watch their own shows, and Ford's retreat to the garage wasn't just about wanting some alone time. It showed how disconnected and dissatisfied he was becoming. His growing isolation led him to unhealthy habits like drug use and heavy drinking, which only made his negative feelings worse. Meanwhile, Leslie's ex, Michael, was over 200 miles away in Telford and had been cut off from his children for 5 years at Ford's request. Michael was a loving father, and the situation of being kept away from his beloved kids left him feeling powerless and helpless. What's truly heartbreaking about this situation is how deeply it affected the children. They were right there, witnessing Lee Ford's abusive behavior towards their mother, and it took a heavy toll on their lives. Sarah Jane, for example, was a very quiet student with a troubling school record. Her poor attendance was a big red flag, hinting that something was seriously wrong at home. Anne-Marie also showed signs of distress, which made it hard for others to connect with her. These behaviors were clear signals that the children were struggling. Leslie's brother, Peter, noticed this firsthand when he visited his sister. He saw how the kids acted differently when Ford was around. When Ford wasn't present, they were lively and engaging, just like kids should be. But as soon as he showed up, their demeanor changed dramatically. They became subdued and withdrawn, a clear sign that something was seriously amiss.
He had gone out of the room or out of the house, and they'd be totally different. They'd be bubbly and laughing, joking, running around, jumping up and down and things, really, like normal kids should do. So he was very controlling over the kids, I think, as well.
And Ford's overprotectiveness of Sarah Jane was particularly troubling. He would keep a close eye on her, even showing up at places she went to. This wasn't just about safety. It was a form of control. Ford was constantly monitoring her movements, which is a big red flag for abusive behavior. Things took a much darker turn when reports revealed that Ford had a sexual relationship with Sarah Jane. She was just 17 at the time, and Ford had been a part of her life since she was 6. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was the culmination of years of grooming and manipulation. Sarah Jane had been subjected to abuse for a long time, making this situation even more tragic. There are also reports that it wasn't just Sarah Jane, but also Anne-Marie who were involved. This might explain why both of them were often quiet and kept to themselves. It's likely that the trauma they experienced played a big part in their behavior and isolation. Peter revealed in an interview that Leslie was aware of the disturbing situation for a while and chose to confide in him, asking for his advice. Despite Peter's serious concerns and warnings, Ford managed to convince Leslie that everything was just fine. Sadly, Leslie's decision to stay with Ford had devastating consequences, and the children were caught in the crossfire. Ford's behavior continued to spiral out of control. Feeling overwhelmed and desperate to change her situation, Leslie made the brave decision to leave him in August 2000. She sought legal help to get a restraining order against Ford and began the process of rebuilding her life for her kids. Meanwhile, Michael, who had been longing to reconnect with his children, took the opportunity to reach out to Sarah Jane. Unfortunately, when he called, she was busy, and that call turned out to be both the first and last time he would speak to any of his children in years.
The last time I spoke to Sarah Jane on the phone was unfortunately the last time that I spoke to any of my children.
The thought of Leslie leaving him and the potential public exposure of his abuse of Sarah Jane and Anne Marie terrified Lee Ford. This fear led to an explosive confrontation between him and Leslie. On August 30th, they had a heated argument about their separation, pushing Lee to the brink. In a moment of unimaginable horror, he decided to commit a crime that no one could have anticipated. After that day, Leslie and her 4 children vanished without a trace. Lee told friends and neighbors in the quiet Cornish village of Carnkey that Leslie had left him, taking the children with her. He canceled a job interview, claiming the family had come down with food poisoning. To cover his tracks, he sent his 2 biological children to stay with relatives and enrolled his youngest child in a new school. Meanwhile, he continued to live in their pebble-dashed bungalow. Lee even attempted to cash in Sarah Jane's last paycheck from McDonald's and made advances to a former girlfriend, all while insisting that Leslie had abandoned him. What's truly chilling is that after weeks of their supposed disappearance, Lee had the audacity to call Peter, Leslie's brother. He said, "Put your sister on. I know she's with you." Peter, confused and concerned, replied that Leslie wasn't with him and asked what was going on. Lee claimed they had a fight over money and that Leslie had left with the kids, but Peter wasn't convinced by Lee's story. Lee's refusal to let Leslie take the younger children and Peter's gut feeling made him suspect that something terrible had happened, even though he didn't want to believe it. Peter's growing fears led him to contact the police, initiating a missing persons investigation. The senior investigator on the case noted an unsettling feeling from the outset. Alarm bells started ringing as soon as Peter reported Leslie's disappearance. Michael, who was also married at the time, grew increasingly worried. He confided in his wife that he believed Lee Ford had killed the children. Although his wife thought he was being irrational, Michael's instinct turned out to be tragically accurate. After Peter reported Leslie and her children missing, the police quickly got involved. Lee Ford, panicked by the investigation, took drastic measures. He reburied the decaying bodies of Sarah Jane and Anne Marie, wrapping them in polythene. Wearing a face mask, he moved the bodies from the woodshed to a potato field about 4 miles away. Ford then took his own children to visit their grandparents in Shropshire, all while planning to move the remaining 3 bodies. On October 4th, police held a press conference announcing that Ford and his 2 children were also missing. Later that day, Ford was arrested while driving across Bodmin Moor. His children were found safe, and that night the police discovered the first of the bodies. Ford, who occasionally worked as a builder and roofer and was known for spending a lot of time drinking at the local cricket club, confessed to the murders. Over a harrowing 24-hour period, Ford murdered his wife, Leslie, and her 4 children, Sarah Jane, who was 17, Anne Marie, 16, Stephen, 14, and Craig, just 13. And it all started when Leslie finally found the guts to confront Ford again about his messed-up relationship with her daughters. She had been worried and upset for a while, and she decided it was time to face him head-on. This confrontation was intense and ugly, and it didn't end well. Ford responded with a horrifyingly brutal attack. What started as a heated argument turned into something much darker. On the fateful day of the murders, he grabbed a baseball bat and used it to beat her severely, right in their bedroom. The whole attack was brutal and unrelenting. After he had finished with that, he didn't stop there. Ford went to his garage, got a piece of rope, and came back to strangle Leslie. He was chillingly precise, using the rope in a way that left barely any visible marks on her. But Ford's killing spree didn't end with Leslie. Next, he turned his sights on Leslie's 4 kids, who he had been raising for more than 10 years. It was clear he had this all planned out. He systematically went through each child, killing them one by one. He approached them from behind using that same length of rope and made sure the murders were carried out in such a way that there were minimal signs of struggle or trauma. It was a horrifying display of premeditation and control. The pathologist later described his method as efficient, which just adds to the creepiness of it all. Ford had done his homework on this. He researched extensively on how to commit murder without getting caught, and it showed in the way he executed his plan. After the killings, he didn't just leave the bodies lying around. Instead, he moved them around to different locations to make sure they wouldn't be easily found. Ford took the bodies from a woodshed and moved them to a potato field, wrapping them in polythene to try and hide the evidence. He only spared his own 2 children with Leslie. His complete lack of remorse during his confession and throughout his court appearances was chilling. At first, Lee Ford tried to play it cool and pleaded not guilty to the murder charges. But on the morning of his trial, May 24, 2001, he decided to change his tune and admitted to killing his wife, Leslie, and her 4 kids. After he came clean, the court wasn't too lenient. A few days later, he was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each murder. Initially, Ford was facing a minimum of 35 years in prison before he could even think about parole. However, that got knocked down to 27 years, so now he's got to wait at least that long before he might have a chance at getting out. The impact on the community and the families of the victims was deep and lasting. Friends, neighbors, and relatives were left grappling with the enormity of the loss. Memorials and tributes sprang up in honor of the victims, and the local school created a book of condolence and a memorial garden. The funerals were deeply somber, with everyone reflecting on the lives that were cut short and the gaping hole left behind. Michael, Leslie's ex-partner, and Peter, Leslie's brother, have been trying to cope with the loss over the years. They find some comfort in the memories they have and the support from their community. Even with time, the pain of losing their loved ones is still very real. Now there's a new layer of worry as there's talk about Ford possibly being released at some point. Family and friends of the victims have started a petition to make sure Ford stays behind bars and never gets out. This petition mistakenly claims he could apply for parole in the next 3 years, but that's not right. The parole board confirmed that Ford isn't up for parole yet. He has to serve the full 27 years, which means he won't even be considered for parole until October 2027. When the time comes, the Secretary of State for Justice will refer his case to the parole board, who will then review whether it's safe to release him. Sometimes prisoners with life sentences can be looked at by the parole board up to 2 years before their minimum term is over. The board decides if they should be moved to an open prison as a step toward potential release. But for now, Ford's case remains firmly under review, and his early release isn't on the table. At the end of the day, Ford absolutely deserves to be locked up and face the harshest punishment for what he did. Leslie's kids had no business going through any of that. They were completely innocent. We can only hope and pray that he never gets out of there. So, if you're dealing with an abusive partner or someone toxic in your life, don't hesitate to reach out for help. It's crucial to put yourself first and take steps to protect yourself. Stay safe out there, and remember, you're not alone in this. If you want more videos like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. Take care, and see you in the next one.